Hi, I'm Ashley. At my graduation, while I was still wearing my cap and holding my diploma, my mom handed me a folder and said, "Give your AI to your cousin." They said Callista had the face, the charm, the media training, while I was just the girl behind the keyboard. They never asked what I'd built. They didn't know NASA had already called. They erased my name from the press kit, cropped me out of the photos, and transferred my scholarship to Callista's startup. But here's the question that still haunts me. This was supposed to be my day. I'd told myself that line too many times over the past month, but the morning light on Kresge Auditorium made it feel like it might finally be true. 4 years of skipped holidays, late nights alone in the lab, hours bent over blinking screens. I'd earned today. The air outside was brisk and dry, the kind of clean, early May chill that made you breathe deeper. Parents swarmed the walkways, clutching bouquets and pointing phones in every direction. Faculty and regalia stood in dignified clusters near the stairs. Inside the auditorium, my name should have been waiting. Ashley Renner, it should have said. Class of 2024, AI Systems Innovator, Research Lead. Instead, the screen glowed with bold serif letters. Callista Renner, Future of AI. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, a miscommunication. Callista was here, yes, but as a guest, not the graduate, not the developer, certainly not the name that should have been on that screen. My stomach folded in on itself, but I stayed where I was, pressed between rows of other students, all of them dressed in the same black gown, none of them noticing what I'd just seen. Then she approached me, my mother. She walked down the aisle like she owned it. That walk of hers, shoulders back, chin high, like life had been a runway, and she'd never tripped once. She held a file folder with a red tab sticking out the side. "Sweetheart," she said, smoothing my sleeve like she hadn't just gutted me in front of 1,000 people. "Just sign this quickly, it's better this way." I stared at her. Better how? She opened the folder and pointed at a signature line on a stack of pre-filled documents. "Let Callista handle the launch. You're a builder, she's the face. We went over this last weekend." I blinked. My head swam. Last weekend. It was supposed to be a family dinner, a quiet night at our house in New Hampshire. But looking back, it had been a strategy session, and I'd been the only one in the room who didn't know it. My dad had poured wine. Callista had brought a pitch deck on her tablet, and my mother had nodded along while describing our brand's narrative. They kept saying "our," but the only time I was mentioned was when someone asked who built the platform. They said it like a footnote. Grandma Irene had tried to interrupt, bless her heart. "Ashley should get her say," she'd started, but my mother cut her off with that smile she reserves for handling complications. She agreed. She doesn't care about the spotlight. But I hadn't agreed. I'd just been quiet. I hadn't realized silence could be repackaged as consent. Back in the present, the ceremony was starting. A brass quartet played. The dean walked on stage. I tucked the folder under my arm like a bomb I wasn't ready to detonate. Rows of students filed forward. Names were read, applause sounded. But when mine should have been called, there was a pause. A stutter. The MC looked confused, glanced at a list, then moved on. No one clapped. No one called my name. Instead, Callista was ushered onto the stage. A spotlight found her. The screen behind her flashed a new slide. Aurora. Powered by vision, led by innovation. Her face filled the auditorium. I stayed in line, moving forward with the rest of the students, walking across the stage in silence. No handshake, no camera flash. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't even look at her. People whispered, "Wasn't she the tech girl?" One voice muttered. "Why is her cousin giving the speech?" Why indeed? After the ceremony, I stepped into a side hallway and opened the folder. The top page was titled Intellectual Property Transfer Agreement. In legalese, it confirmed that the core AI system I'd built, my work, my thesis, my nights and weekends, would now be considered co-owned, with Callista listed as Public Interface and Executive Director. There were 5 signatures already. My parents, Callista, her lawyer, a witness. Mine was the only one missing. They hadn't even waited to see if I'd say yes. They just assumed I would, because that's what I'd always done. I could have screamed, could have walked back into that auditorium and caused a scene, but instead, I closed the folder, slipped it into my bag, and walked out the side exit before Callista finished her speech. No goodbyes, no confrontation, just the wind outside, the smell of wet pavement, and a silence thick enough to choke on. That was the last time I let anyone else narrate my work. The applause was still echoing behind me as I stepped into the open courtyard. Callista's voice, artificially confident, polished like her rehearsed speech, drifted through the speakers. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the quad, where the tents and folding chairs sprawled like an afterthought, each decorated with clusters of blue and gold streamers. People milled about with champagne flutes in hand, taking selfies, hugging, laughing. It looked exactly like a graduation party, just not mine. I stood on the grass, watching as my family swarmed around Callista. She was already surrounded by a small crowd, camera flashes bouncing off her pearl-white dress, her smile flawless, her arms raised as if she were a returning celebrity. "Ashley, sweetie," my aunt called out to me, not realizing she was already turning away before I could respond. "Get in the photo. Wait, maybe just take it?" Of course. Of course. They wanted me to take it. I stepped back into the shade of the tent, unnoticed. My mother lifted her glass and raised her voice, just enough for the nearby guests to hear. "To Callista, the face of the next chapter in AI, our very own trailblazer." Choruses of "Here, here," and "What a genius" rippled through the group. I sipped from the plastic cup in my hand, water lukewarm and stale. My name hadn't even been said once. A woman with red lipstick leaned toward someone beside her and whispered, "She's really going places." What did her cousin do again? Data input? I wrote the system that can detect a cyber attack in less than 2 seconds. I designed the architecture. I built the adaptive response protocols. But apparently, I also make a great prop. "Guess she's the brain behind it, right?" Another voice added. "Callista just made it marketable." I turned and walked toward the PR booth they had set up along the quad, just past the food table. Mariel was already there, waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a napkin to wipe the frosting off my sleeve from someone's careless cupcake celebration. Then she leaned in. "Did you see the final slides?" "No," I answered, though I already knew what she was about to say. "They cropped you out." She pulled up the digital presentation on her phone. There, between 2 cleanly edited headshots of Callista, were the team photos. Once proud, full of smiles after nights of breakthroughs. I was in the original ones. Now, I was either faded behind a logo or cleanly erased. In one, the edge of my elbow remained. Nothing else. We walked together to the display monitors set up for sponsors and investors. Giant banners lined the walkway, Callista's face printed in soft focus overlays, with slogans like, "Leading the future, building today." I didn't exist in any of it. "This wasn't accidental," I whispered. "This was surgical." I found her near the press backdrop, where a photographer adjusted lights for yet another round of posed brilliance. Callista turned when I tapped her shoulder. "Did you approve the slides?" I asked. She gave a little shrug. "They just wanted a cleaner visual. Nothing personal. You're the brain. I'm the brand." I nodded once, lips pressed tight. "Right." She tilted her head, almost playfully. "Don't take it so hard. Not everyone is made for the front page. People don't stab you out loud. They delete you quietly. That's how erasure works in polite society." I didn't argue. I didn't throw a drink in her face or rip the banner down. I just walked. Walked past the crowd, past the table of cupcakes with the Aurora logo stamped in icing, past the string lights flickering in midday sunshine. Near the back of the tent, I sat alone and pulled out my phone. There it was again. Subject: Initial review of Project Aurora. Invite to discuss further. The message from NASA had come in days ago. I hadn't told anyone. I'd read it in bed one night, barely breathing. I'd reread it since then, more times than I could count. I hadn't replied. Until now. I opened a new draft. No CC. No forwarding. Just me and the blank screen. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. They gave her the crown, but they forgot I built the kingdom. Maybe it was the way the sun dipped low behind the Boston skyline that made everything feel muted. Or maybe it was the silence in the car that pressed heavier than the folder on my lap. I sat in the back seat, boxed in by shadows, while Mom and Callista chatted like they'd just come back from winning a reality show. "I think that branding team loved your pitch, honey," Mom said, beaming. "Oh, totally. They kept asking if I'd considered writing a book," Callista replied, her voice sugar-coated and smooth. I didn't say a word, just stared out the window as the world blurred by. Trees, signs, rest stops, all of it dissolving in the reflection of my own face. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles in when you're the only one in a car full of people who rewrote your story and expect you to be grateful for it. The drive back to New Hampshire felt longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because time seemed to slow down between the comments tossed around up front. "You handled the spotlight beautifully," Mom said, reaching for the radio dial like the day hadn't shattered something permanent. Callista laughed. "Well, someone had to step up." No one asked me how I felt. No one asked if I'd had a good day. It was like I wasn't even there. By the time we pulled into the driveway, dusk had turned the house blue-gray. I slipped out without waiting for anyone, letting the screen door click behind me as I walked into the kitchen. The dining table had already been reset, centerpiece polished, candles lit. The same table from last weekend's rehearsal dinner. Tonight, it was louder. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all gathered again. This time, they toasted with real champagne. Someone clinked a glass and shouted, "To Callista, MIT's finest!" Callista smiled, raised her flute. "Couldn't have done it without family." I took a seat at the far end, next to the window. My chair didn't even have a name card. As I picked at the edge of the napkin in my lap, I heard my little cousin whisper across the table, "Why didn't Ashley say anything today?" I looked up, met her eyes, and smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence is louder." Her brows furrowed. She nodded slowly, unsure what I meant, but she didn't ask again. The dinner blurred together. Callista recapped her speech like it had been some spontaneous TED Talk. Every time someone laughed at her jokes, I folded inward just a little more. They hadn't even noticed I was gone from the stage. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to ask why. After dessert, I found myself back in the same hallway from years ago. I could still hear the echoes of another night, my 15th birthday. I just won the state science fair, brought home a certificate, a medal, and more excitement than I knew what to do with. No one asked about it. They were too busy watching Callista show off her first fashion vlog, projected on the TV in the living room. Her subscriber count had just hit 500. That night, Grandma Irene found me in the kitchen, wiping down the counter like it would make me feel less invisible. She handed me a piece of her lemon cake, set it gently beside me. "Sweetheart," she said, "never let them write you out of your own book." I remember looking at her and whispering, "But they control the pen." She leaned in, tapped the side of her temple. "Then you build your own printing press." Back in the present, I heard the garage door close. The guests were leaving. The energy drained from the house, replaced by that strange echo of quiet that settles after a party that wasn't yours. I climbed the stairs to my room and locked the door. My bag sat in the corner, unzipped. I pulled out my journal, the one I used to sketch out the original Aurora designs. The pages were worn, the ink slightly faded from the hours I spent scribbling by desk lamp glow. I flipped through diagrams, notations, post-it flags. Then I turned to the last blank page and wrote a single word: redirecting. The screen of my laptop lit up just as I closed the journal. New email: Professor Hallbridge, urgent. Check your inbox. NASA request: Confidential. Maybe it's time I wrote my own version of what happened today. I clicked the email. It took a moment for the video to buffer, just enough time for me to brace. The file was labeled Aurora Vision Campaign, Draft Reel. A polished opening title slid across the screen in soft gray. Meet the visionary behind Project Aurora. Then her face appeared. Callista, lit like she was about to save the world, smiling wide into the camera as a soft piano score swelled beneath her voice. Only, it wasn't her voice. It was mine. From a prototype demo I'd recorded 2 semesters ago for Professor Halbridge's graduate mentorship review. Unedited. My exact phrasing, my cadence, everything. But there was no caption, no footnote, no acknowledgement. Callista's face, my voice. The rest of the video played out like a highlight reel of stolen breath. Screenshots of lines I'd written late at night, graphs from my simulation tests, edited just enough to feel unfamiliar. She narrated progress she'd never pushed. She smiled through accomplishments she'd never stayed late for. The video ended with the tagline, led by Callista Renner, concept creator, team leader, innovator. I stared at the screen, heat crawling up my neck. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I still trusted. Halbridge answered on the second ring. "Ashley," he said, voice low and already heavy. "Did you know they were going to erase everything?" A pause. Then, "I submitted your name as sole inventor on the final report. They pulled me from the speaking list the day before. That video, I didn't approve it. They rewrote the record. We keep the real one." I believed him, but it didn't change what the world had just seen. The next morning, I pulled myself together, threw on the black blazer I kept for interviews, and headed to the conference hotel downtown, where Callista's team was hosting a sponsor mixer. The space was decked in navy and silver. A massive banner stretched across the back wall with the words, "Aurora Collective, Building a Safer Digital World." Her name was on every placard, every pamphlet, every wall. I found the PR table. A young woman with perfect teeth and an overused lanyard greeted me. "I need to speak with your campaign director," I said. She looked me up and down. "Name?" "Ashley Renner, the creator of Aurora." She blinked, then stood a little straighter. "Just a moment." A man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a pinstripe jacket approached a few minutes later. "You must be Callista's cousin," he said, smiling like I'd just brought him a check. "I want to know who approved using my code and my recorded voice in that campaign reel," I said, cutting past pleasantries. "Neither were cleared, and I never consented." His smile didn't move. "The Aurora brand is legally represented under Callista Renner. The imagery and messaging fall under family-shared intellectual context. You'd have to take that up with your parents." I clenched my jaw. "That's not how IP law works." "Miss Renner," he said coolly, "we've cleared all usage with the family. Callista owns the image rights. This campaign is about vision. You're welcome to attend today's session, but please don't disrupt the brand message." I didn't punch him. I didn't scream. I just stared at him for 3 long seconds, then walked away. They hadn't just taken my voice. They'd built an entire narrative where I never existed. Outside, the morning sun bounced off the glass towers downtown. I kept walking until I reached the metro stop, pulled out my phone, and sent a text to Halbridge. "Let's set the meeting. No family, just me." Later that afternoon, I walked back toward my apartment. On the corner billboard above the neighborhood pharmacy, Callista's face beamed down in crisp digital HD. The caption, "Vision, Voice, Vanguard." I stopped. In the reflection of the glass screen, I saw myself, small, faded by sunlight, standing in yesterday's blazer with dark circles under my eyes. She may be the face of it, but I'm the one they'll remember when it breaks. The billboard's glow was still behind my eyes as I walked into the restaurant. My heels clicked against the marble floor harder than I intended, but no one turned. A hostess gestured silently toward the private room in the back, and I followed the trail of muted laughter and polished wine glasses. They were already seated. My mother sat at the head of the table, her spine perfectly straight, a napkin folded precisely in her lap. Callista lounged next to her, swirling a glass of something pale gold. Two men in dark suits, family advisors, I assumed, occupied the other chairs, nodding as if they'd just sealed a real estate deal. The table was already set. So was the tone. "Darling," Mom said, not quite looking at me. "I'm glad you came. We thought it was important to have this conversation in person." I pulled out the only empty chair. No menu in front of it. No water glass. "This isn't a dinner, is it?" "It's a planning session," she replied smoothly. "We need to align our strategy." Callista slid a folder toward me. Same color as the last one. Same binding. "This is a mutual agreement of benefit," Mom continued. "You'll be acknowledged as the technical originator, but public-facing roles require a specific polish. Callista has it. You build." I opened the folder, eyes skimming the fine print. Phrases like derivative branding rights, strategic alignment, multi-tiered public narrative. It was a circus tent of legal cover for stealing center stage. "It's not a deal," I said, barely above a whisper. "It's a muzzle dressed like a microphone." "You're overreacting," Callista said, reaching for the breadbasket. "This is about elevating all of us." Marielle, seated silently at the end, finally spoke. "Ashley is the creator. This alignment doesn't acknowledge legal origin. It rewrites authorship." One of the suited men leaned forward. "This is a family matter. You're not a stakeholder." I saw Marielle's lips tighten, her hand twitching beneath the table. She didn't respond, but I saw the same flicker in her eyes that I'd felt on the stage, the moment you realize you're being erased, again. Mom placed her silverware down deliberately. "Ashley," she said, voice syrupy with disappointment. "You don't want to jeopardize your future. The house, the trust, your father's estate, those aren't entitlements. They're maintained by the family." Callista leaned back, her smile too relaxed. "Come on, Ash. You're not really trying to take this to court, are you?" I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. "I'm not trying to fight you," I said quietly. "I just won't follow." Then I pushed back my chair and stood. "You wanted a puppet. I built an engine. You can keep the dinner, the legacy, the last name. I'll keep the code." No one stopped me as I walked out. Outside, the air hit me like clarity. Cold, bracing, necessary. The sound of silverware and muted conversation disappeared behind the door. I pulled out my phone. A new message had just come in from NASA's scheduler. Subject: confirmed. Interview in D.C., Thursday, 9:30 a.m. If they thought inheritance could buy my silence, they don't understand what I inherited from Grandma. By the time I got back to my apartment, the night had cooled off enough to make the windows sweat slightly from the warmth inside. I slipped my keys into the bowl by the door and dropped the folder, still unopened, on the kitchen counter. The weight of it didn't deserve more of my attention. Marielle was already there, sitting at the small table with 2 coffees, and that look she gave me when she knew I was about to break, but couldn't afford to. "They posted something," she said without preamble, sliding her phone toward me. Her tone was too flat to be casual. I didn't need to ask who. I tapped the screen and opened the post. It was Callista, of course. A glossy photo with her in a blazer, one hand resting on a tablet, the other mid-gesture, like she was solving a global crisis. The caption read, "Excited to lead the next generation of AI innovations. Project Aurora is just the start. How female founder show visionary tech." I almost laughed. Almost. Marielle swiped to the next image. Same photo, zoomed in. In the lower right corner of the screen, she held, part of my original interface code glowed faintly. Not blurred. Just ignored. My name wasn't on it, but I didn't need it to be to know what it was. Then I read her comment. "Great vision starts with fearless leadership." "There's the smirk," I said aloud. Marielle looked up. She didn't even hide it. Not on her face, I replied. On the caption. That's the kind of smile people give when they know you can't stop them. We sat in silence for a minute. The kind of silence that builds into something sharp. Marielle broke it by opening her laptop. You should see this. She pulled up a page from a mid-tier tech blog. It hadn't gone viral yet, but it would. The headline read, Aurora Tech Collective signs solo deal with Brand Nation Media. Callista's face again. Callista's name again. No mention of me. Not even in the footnotes. The article credited her with visionary development, technical leadership, and future-forward AI design. Words pulled from my thesis, twisted just enough to sound original. They're calling her the architect, Muriel said, her voice rising. They used my silence as confirmation, I muttered. My absence became their proof. I stood up, walked across the room to the whiteboard I hadn't touched in weeks. The last formulas were still there, half-solved logic loops and architecture flow. I erased the corner, picked up a marker, and wrote one word, reclaim. Then I picked up my phone. I'll be in DC Friday, I said into the voicemail. Yes, alone. After I hung up, I returned to the table. Mariel handed me a printout she'd made of the press release. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I took it, walked to my desk, and pinned it to the corkboard next to my original system diagram, side by side. Then I grabbed a black pen and wrote underneath, She can sell the face. I'll protect the brain. It felt small, that gesture, but it was the first one that made sense all day. I opened my laptop, pulled up my files, and started from the beginning. Version 1 of Aurora's core. One by one, I loaded code, date-stamped revisions, audio memos, and cloud backups. Every iteration, every voice memo, every bug fix and crash and rewrite. Proof they couldn't argue with. Proof that didn't need applause. Just accuracy. Let her build the brand. I'm building the record. The sun hadn't even finished crawling into the kitchen when Marielle buzzed the doorbell. She didn't knock. Just walked in, holding a thin envelope between two fingers, like it was contaminated. She dropped it on the table without saying a word. A manila folder, lightly creased but heavy with intent. Patent records, she said flatly. Pulled them myself. Public access. No password needed. I sat up slowly, still in my t-shirt from the night before. What am I looking at? She didn't answer. Just tapped the top page, where my name was supposed to be. Sole inventor, lead developer, original creator of Project Aurora. Instead, the document listed two names. Ashley Renner, Callista Renner, co-developers. My heart didn't even race. It just slowed. Like the body's way of making space for rage. They filed it 2 weeks ago, Marielle continued. Processed through a family attorney. Signature line for you? Already signed. Forged. They assumed you'd go along with it. They didn't just plan for me to give in, I said. The words barely forming. They built an entire version of events where I already had. Marielle's voice shifted. Harder now. We can file an injunction. Right now. I have contacts who'll move fast. Not yet, I said. Let them lie one more time. In public. That afternoon, I made tea and tried to work, but the screen in front of me kept blurring. Not from tears. Those had dried up days ago. But from the weight of clarity. I didn't just need proof. I needed strategy. That's when Grandma called. Honey, she said, her voice brittle but warm. I just got a call from the Scholarship Foundation. You remember? The Women in Tech one? My back straightened. They're sending out a press release about a new partnership. They said it's being done in your honor. In my honor? Well, she hesitated. They said Callista pitched it. That she was using your name to launch an initiative for underrepresented developers. Said she was the recipient of your grant, and now she's paying it forward. The grant had covered my last semester at MIT. Without it, I wouldn't have graduated. I wouldn't have launched Aurora. That scholarship was my safety net when no one else in the family had lifted a finger. They used my name, I whispered, to fund her fake empire. Marielle and I sat down that evening and drafted an outline. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. A timeline. Source code iterations. Cloud backups. Email timestamps, Zoom recordings, everything I'd touched from conception to prototype. We weren't accusing, we were archiving. If I speak now, I said, closing the lid on my laptop, it won't be anger, it'll be audit. The next morning, just after I'd brewed coffee, I saw the notification, a live stream alert from the Women in Tech Summit. I opened it and leaned back in my chair. There she was, Callista, on stage in soft lavender, holding a microphone like it was her inheritance. Her hair pulled back in that casual, I'm focused but effortless look she'd perfected since high school. I'm honored to announce a partnership with the Aurora Scholarship Foundation, she said, voice calm, camera ready. As a proud recipient of this award, I believe in investing back into the community that shaped me. The audience applauded. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She named the grant I'd won. She smiled like it had always been hers. I didn't throw the mug. I didn't shout. I just sat there, letting the applause pour through my laptop speakers like static. Then I smiled. Not amused, not bitter. Locked in. She just forged her final receipt. The applause on the live stream hadn't even faded when my phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't social media. It was NASA. I answered before the second ring. Ashley Renner? The voice on the other end was calm, clipped, legal. Yes. This is Michelle Carson with NASA's Innovation and Legal Office. We've completed our internal review of your system logs and metadata, and we'd like to formally move forward. An in-person meeting has been scheduled for Thursday morning, 9:30 a.m., at the DC office. I leaned back into the kitchen chair, hand tightening around my phone. Confirmed. Please arrive with all relevant materials. We will be issuing the technical credit to your name exclusively. After I hung up, I sat there for a full minute, staring at nothing. Across the room, Mariel stood frozen with her laptop open. Ashley, she said, her voice quieter than usual. You need to see this. She turned the screen toward me. It was a file transfer notification, anonymous sender, no subject line, but the file name was enough. B-roll studio meeting, audio clip.mp4. We clicked play. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 6 weeks earlier at a downtown branding agency. Callista sat at a conference table, laughing with a group of strategists, casually flipping through slides, and then she said it. Ashley, she builds stuff, but she doesn't know how to sell it. I'll take care of that. Just cut her name from the deck, she won't fight. No shame, no hesitation, just strategy. Mariel's face twisted, but I didn't react. I watched it again, and again. Then a third time. By the fourth watch, I was nodding. Not out of agreement, but out of certainty. She just gave me the rope, I said. Let's hand it to the reporter. I opened a blank email and attached the video file, then added the timestamps from our documents, a few internal project dates, and a concise subject line. For context, Aurora background materials. I didn't ask permission. I didn't wait for a green light. Within hours, the clip was viral. First on tech Twitter, then on startup message boards, and finally, mainstream tech media. The hashtag started slowly. Aurora fraud. By lunchtime, it was trending. By dinner, it was a PR fire. Side-by-side comparisons surfaced almost immediately. One post showed Callista's conference slide, with her face next to Aurora's tagline, and beside it, a screenshot from 2 years earlier. My original pitch deck to Hallbridge, dated and signed. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. At brunch the next morning, I imagined the tension was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Mom called me 3 times. I didn't answer. But Marielle forwarded me a screen grab from a message board. Someone had reposted the branding agency video with a caption that read, "She built it. Her cousin branded it. Know the difference." I smiled at that one. By late afternoon, the fallout started landing hard. Callista's face was plastered across tech gossip headlines. Investors were pulling out. Sponsors issued reviewing relationship statements. The PR firm that signed her? quietly removed her from their active roster. And then the family saw it. Mariel texted me from across town. Your mom slammed her phone on the table during brunch. Quote, she just humiliated this family in front of the entire industry. I imagined her saying it, jaw tight, fingers trembling, not out of heartbreak, but out of exposure. Callista. She was scrambling. A voice memo leaked later that night, catching her asking if the branding firm could pivot messaging to an inclusive team narrative. It was too late. The internet didn't do mercy, not when receipts were involved. By the time I got back home, a new email waited in my inbox. This one from NASA's Official Communications Department. Subject, confirmation. Lead technical role designation. Body, we will name you as sole technical lead in the upcoming press release. Congratulations. Please confirm your availability for the joint announcement. I walked over to my closet, pulled out the only formal suit I owned. Charcoal gray, clean lines, no frills. I folded my code notebooks into a slim black case. I didn't pack for battle, I packed for arrival. That night, I didn't go to sleep angry. I didn't rehearse my rage or scribble rebuttals. I just stood at the Amtrak station the next morning, watching the first train pull in through the early fog, my reflection faint in the glass. Blurred, but there. They wrote me out of the story. Now I'm printing the headline. The train was still pulling out of the station when my phone vibrated again. It wasn't from NASA this time. It was from a friend in the industry, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Check Twitter, the message read. I opened the app and my breath caught. The trending tag was already past 10,000 mentions. Aurora scam. Thread after thread dissected the footage, the audio, the branding materials. But it was one post that stopped me cold. A collage of images with a headline that read, she took her cousin's code, her pitch, her past. The top left photo in the collage was unmistakable. A girl no older than 7, holding a robot made out of cereal boxes and scrap wires. Me. My first county fair science competition. The same image that had sat on Grandma Irene's fridge for over a decade. The same one that had never been posted online. Until now. I stared at it for a full minute before calling Grandma. She picked up on the second ring. Ashley, sweetheart. Did you send that robot photo to anyone? I asked gently. No, she said, confused. But I saw it in that glossy thing your mom mailed out before graduation, the investor packet. I thought maybe you gave her permission. I didn't. A long pause, then. I should have asked. No, Grandma, you didn't do anything wrong. But someone had. That picture wasn't just stolen. It was repurposed, twisted into a childhood narrative Callista never lived, sold as a cute origin story to prop up a lie. Later that evening, back at my apartment, Marielle dug through our old shared folders, looking for anything that could solidify what was already flooding the public sphere. Her search paused on a file neither of us remembered saving. Aurora, Alpha, Gen.doc. She opened it. My jaw locked. The metadata was untouched. Creation date from 3 years ago. Author, Ashley Renner. No co-authors. But what caught us both was the activity log. 6 months ago, the file had been downloaded using a login ID connected to Callista's PR account. She had taken my draft, my foundation, and she'd hidden her edits deep enough to avoid fingerprints. Until now. I opened my early Zoom folder and found the first demo I'd done for Professor Hallbridge. Before the branding, before the pitch decks, before Callista even showed interest. I screen recorded it, then attached it to a new email along with the metadata. Subject: Aurora, original development record, verified. I sent it directly to the journalist who'd covered the earlier leak. No commentary, no request. The article went live by sunrise. Title: The Theft Beneath the Smile. How a Young Woman's Genius Was Masked by Family PR. Within hours, it was everywhere. Newsletters, LinkedIn groups, podcast snippets. Some people tagged me, but most didn't need to. The content spoke for itself. The receipts were loud enough. I didn't post a thing. I let it breathe. I let the world see what had been there all along. What came next wasn't rage, it was silence. But this silence wasn't the usual cold shoulder or condescending brush-off. This time, it was stunned, unprepared, desperate. I didn't hear from my mother. Not a single message. No calls from Callista. No apology statement drafted by a PR firm. No clever tweet to redirect the narrative. Just quiet. And for once, I let it stay that way. In the late afternoon, as I poured a fresh cup of tea and sat by the window, another email arrived. NASA. Subject: Official Launch Conference. Invitation as lead innovator. The message was short but clear. We would be honored if you'd participate as our confirmed lead for Aurora during the official press announcement. Please advise availability. I didn't hesitate. I clicked reply. Now they'll have to say my name. The video from NASA's press office was only 2 minutes long, but that was all it needed. It circulated like wildfire before breakfast. No music, no dramatic editing, just the director of innovation standing behind a simple podium, flanked by a plain blue banner with the NASA seal. We confirm that the Aurora AI security framework was developed solely by Ashley Renner, he stated. Effective immediately, all external partnerships will reflect this correction. The clip paused on a still image of my code interface, with a date-stamped commit log projected beside it. The real thing, nothing flashy, just proof. Meanwhile, in a loft apartment across Boston, Callista was spiraling. Her PR team had been called in hours earlier. One of them, Glenn, I think, was pacing with a tablet in hand. The memo's been leaked. We're being flooded with requests for comment. Callista sat at the end of the kitchen island, wineglass untouched beside her. I need options, she said, voice cracking. We say she hacked the account. You can't spin this, Glenn interrupted. If we talk now, we admit you misrepresented. If we stay quiet, we look guilty. Either way, we lose. She set me up. No, Glenn replied without blinking. You set yourself up. She just turned on the lights. He walked out 5 minutes later. Back at the Renner house, my mother sat frozen in front of the TV. CNN was running the NASA statement as a top story. Aurora creator confirmed. Family PR under scrutiny. The camera panned briefly to my headshot, taken from the MIT faculty page. She reached for the remote, then stopped halfway. The phone rang on the end table. It was her attorney. You're not listed on any of the filings, he said flatly. We can't argue contribution. There's no legal footprint. Behind her, the front door opened. Grandma Irene stepped inside, carrying a grocery bag and catching the tail end of the segment. She set the bag down gently and looked toward my mother. I told you this would happen, she said. You bet against the wrong granddaughter. No reply came. Just the quiet hum of a television making more noise than anyone in the room. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a campus cafe in D.C., laptop open, coffee cooling beside me. The NASA press conference was live on mute, captions scrolling across the bottom. The director's voice, even in text, sounded steady. This moment reminds us that recognition must follow innovation, not image, he said. Our partnership with Ashley Renner is a reflection of that principle. I glanced to my left as Marielle slid into the seat opposite me. She didn't say anything at first, just smiled and placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside, the signed NASA partnership agreement. My name, front and center. You want to frame it? She asked. Not yet. Across the cafe, someone was reading the article from the same tech blog that broke the initial leak. The headline now read, From erased to exclusive, Ashley Renner signs sole AI deal with NASA. Beneath it, a single line of commentary. No comment from Callista Renner or her team. I closed my laptop and reached for my coffee. The bitterness was familiar, but this time, it didn't taste like defeat. It tasted like clarity. Outside, the sun had broken through the morning cloud cover, casting soft gold across the brick sidewalk. I stood, tucked the envelope into my bag, and walked the 2 blocks to the NASA Research Center. No camera crews, no fanfare. Just my steps, solid and even, on the path I'd built for myself. Some people chase legacies, others just build them. The day after the NASA announcement felt strangely still. I was back in Portsmouth, sitting in the sunroom at Irene's house, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. The storm had passed, but the air was still heavy with the residue. My mother's phone rang at 9:17 a.m. She picked up with her usual clipped tone. "Hello?" The voice on the other end belonged to their oldest investor, a man who'd known our family since before I was born. I couldn't hear his words, but I saw the way her expression shifted, tightening at first, then cracking at the edges. "I understand," she said after a long silence. "Yes, of course." She hung up without another word. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. "He's out," she finally said to no one in particular. "Pulling his funding from Callista's extension, said it's bad optics, and that he's seen the documents." No one spoke. There was nothing left to defend. Later that morning, I opened my laptop to check on contract finalizations with NASA. An unread message sat in my inbox with no subject line. It was from Callista. "You won! Hope you're proud." No salutation, no signature, just those 6 words. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds, then forwarded it to Marielle with a quick note. "For the record, no response necessary." By noon, Grandma Irene showed up at my apartment with a small cardboard box in her hands. She didn't knock, just used her spare key and stepped in like she had every right. Which she did. "I brought you something," she said, setting the box on the table. "Didn't think it would mean much when I saved it." Inside were clippings from local newspapers, photos of me at robotics competitions, a yellowing article about my middle school science fair win, and a photo I hadn't seen in years. 14 years old, holding a hand-wired prototype of what would eventually inspire Aurora. I was standing next to a whiteboard, marker still in hand, mid-sentence. "They never knew what they had," she said, voice soft. "But you did." I didn't say anything. My throat tightened, but not from pain. It was the relief of being seen without needing to explain. Later that week, I got a message from my mother. "Lunch?" I agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our houses. No fanfare, no expectations. She arrived 10 minutes late, sat down, and didn't order anything. "I thought I was doing what was best for the family name," she said, eyes on the table. "I forgot you were the legacy." I nodded slowly. "I'm not angry anymore." She looked up, hopeful. "But I don't need a name to make an impact." Her expression shifted, like she wasn't sure whether to feel insulted or humbled. We didn't hug when we left. There were no promises to talk more or make things right. Just a nod. Quiet. Honest. Enough. I flew back to D.C. that evening. At the NASA campus, a small group met me at the front desk. I recognized none of their faces, but all of them knew mine. "Welcome back," one of them said, smiling. Some stories don't end in applause or apologies. They just end, so new ones can begin. That night, as I unpacked my suitcase and opened my laptop to check final edits on the partnership presentation, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I picked up. "Hi, this is Janine at The Atlantic. We'd like to run a feature on you, your journey, your work. You in?" I smiled, closed my laptop, and answered. "Let's tell the story the right way this time." 2 weeks after the press conference, I walked into the corner newsstand on E Street, just blocks from the Capitol, and saw it. There, stacked beside morning coffee and folded newspapers, was the latest issue of Forward Tech Monthly. My face, not Callista's, not a logo, stood full frame on the cover. I was standing in front of NASA's DC campus, sunlight cutting across my cheek, eyes steady on the horizon. Above it, bold letters spelled out, From Erased to Essential, The Woman Who Rewrote the Code. I didn't buy a copy. I didn't need to. The story inside wasn't about redemption. It was about documentation of what was, what had been stolen, and what had finally been returned. I did, however, accept the next speaking engagement. The STEM Women's Symposium held their annual summit a week later in Atlanta. I stood backstage in a navy dress and low heels, the kind you wear when you need to move confidently without apology. When I stepped into the light, the room greeted me not with cheers, but with stillness, listening, waiting. "I'm not here to talk about what was taken," I said. "I'm here to talk about what I kept." I paused, letting the silence settle. Innovation doesn't need permission, it needs protection, not because people doubt what you build, but because they'll repackage it before you even sign your name. A beat passed. "And when that happens," I added, "don't wait for someone to hand you a mic. Write your own headline." The applause that followed was different than the noise from my graduation day. This was sharper, earned. Afterward, girls no older than 15 lined up by the podium, each one with questions about code, college, and courage. I answered everyone. Not because I was trying to be a role model, but because no one had done it for me. Elsewhere, the internet moved on, as it does, but not before one more final headline appeared on a smaller tech blog, barely shared. Callista Renner's startup quietly shuts down. No statement, no pivot, just silence. One former sponsor commented anonymously, "We're more careful now with who we spotlight." Meanwhile, I flew home to Portsmouth. I wanted Irene to see the magazine before someone else mailed it to her. Her fridge still held the photo, me at 7, holding my first robot, a crooked thing with wires sticking out. But now it had a frame around it. We sat on the porch in the late afternoon, mugs of tea resting between us. She nodded toward the horizon. "You didn't just win, sweetheart," she said softly. "You taught them what not to forget." I looked out over the quiet town I'd once wanted so badly to escape, and for the first time, I felt like I hadn't run from it. I'd returned on my terms. Back in DC, the apartment felt different. Not bigger, not brighter, just real. I walked into my home office and looked at the wall behind my desk. Framed in the center, the NASA contract. To the right, the magazine cover. And below, cut in crisp vinyl letters. They told me to give it away. Instead, I gave it to the world.